I'll tell you what, Israel's fighting Hezbollah too long and too many people are being killed. And you don't have to knock down an apartment house every time you're looking for somebody, because there are a lot of people in those apartment houses, and they're not all Hezbollah, that I can tell you. Without the United States, there would be no Israel. Without me, there would be no Israel, because no other president was willing to do what I did. I've had a great relationship with Bibi, but now Bibi has to be more responsible with respect to Lebanon.
You just heard Donald Trump tepidly criticize war criminal and international fugitive Benjamin Netanyahu for sabotaging U.S. peace talks with Iran, because as stupid as Donald Trump is, he still understands that the longer this war drags on, the greater the political cost will be to him and his Republican cronies ahead of the midterms. So it would behoove him to get out as quickly as possible. And for what it's worth, it seems like he does actually want to do that, seeing as how he claimed that a deal with Iran was right around the corner 38 different times and counting. But every single time it falls through because Donald Trump's partner in crime, Israel, doesn't want him to make peace with Iran. And that's not a conspiracy theory or conjecture. They've outright admitted that they don't want the United States to make peace with Iran. Ben-Gvir explicitly said that the genocidal government of Israel will not allow Trump to make a peace deal with Iran, and they've made good on that promise repeatedly. Stephen Prager of Common Dreams reported in late May, as it has during previous peace negotiations between Iran and the U.S., Israel launched another major bombardment against Lebanon on Tuesday, violating the 45-day ceasefire that went into effect last month. And before that, back in early April, Israel launched what was referred to as apocalyptic strikes on southern Lebanon, where they launched 100 missiles in 10 minutes that killed 87 people the day after the U.S. and Iran agreed to a 2-week ceasefire. Fast forward to June, and Israel did it again, this time in open defiance of Donald Trump. Jake Johnson of Common Dreams explains, the Israeli military bombed Iran shortly after U.S. President Donald Trump urged Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to not respond to an Iranian missile barrage, which came in retaliation for Israel's earlier bombing of Beirut. And 2 days ago, Trump condemned another attack on Beirut from Israel, citing how close he was to a peace deal with Iran. So every single time we get close to a peace deal with Iran, Israel sabotages it to keep the U.S. entrenched in this war even longer, because there is a clear conflict between Donald Trump and Netanyahu's political goals. Trump wants to get out as quickly as possible and claim victory to minimize the political cost, whereas Netanyahu wants to keep the war going as long as he can to maximize the political benefit to him, because that's what Israel's psychotic and bloodthirsty society wants. But Israel needs the U.S. to keep this war going, so that's why they are trying to drag Trump back into war whenever he gets closer to a peace deal. But Iran has been pretty consistent from the beginning that any and all agreements must include Lebanon, otherwise they wouldn't agree to anything. And this Memorandum of Understanding that we've all been talking about, that is no different, by the way.
The announcement of putting an end to the war was announced Monday morning. Any military attack from the Zionist entity against Lebanon from now on will never be accepted. The continuation of the Israeli occupation to Lebanese territories is a violation of the Memorandum of Understanding.
So if you're wondering whether or not the latest MOU will actually lead to peace, I guess that depends on whether or not Israel will allow it to lead to peace, because all they have to do is bomb Lebanon, and like that, we're back to square one. Now, at the time that I record this, nobody really knows what's in the memorandum, but there are various reports about what may be in this 60-day memorandum. It reportedly pushes back talks of Iran's nuclear enrichment, and there's this offer, apparently, that Iran is going to get $300 billion from the U.S. in what is effectively reparations for the damage that the U.S. caused, although Trump has called that fake news, but he might just be saying that that's fake news to get Republicans off of his back, since they're accusing him of surrendering to Iran, which he kind of has no choice but to do, since they have all the leverage in the world since we lost the war. There's also uncertainty about whether or not Iran will be able to charge a toll for the Strait of Hormuz after a certain period of time, but none of this is confirmed, and the only way to actually know what's real and what isn't is for Iran to confirm it, because our government is so unreliable that we have to depend on the word of the country that we're at war with for the truth. That's where we're at right now as a country. So I'm not believing anything unless Iran says it or unless I see it with my own two eyes, because Trump is going to spin it as a victory to save face, even if he surrenders. And literally nothing this man says holds any weight whatsoever, including his supposed criticisms of Israel, because if he really wanted to rein in Israel, he'd cut them off militarily, which would guarantee that they wouldn't have the capacity to keep bombing Lebanon. But he hasn't done that, so his actions indicate that his criticisms of Israel are disingenuous at best. And given how Congress is quietly fusing our military-industrial complex with Israel's, I get the sense that all of this is kabuki theater, and Trump's public denunciations of Israel are nothing more than some ploy to get Iran to give America a pass for Israel's war crimes in Lebanon. But I think they'd be smarter than that, right? But again, I don't know what's happening, but it is weird that Trump went from threatening to kill Iranian civilization to complimenting their leadership and saying they're not radical.
I want to mention Iran. We appreciate the relationship we've had over the short period of time with Iran. We're dealing with people that I think are very rational people. I mean, they were nice to deal with. They were strong people, smart people. I think actually they're smarter than the first and second group. But they're not radicalized, and they're, looking to help their country.
Yeah, call me crazy, but something seems really off here. You don't publicly denounce your partner in crime who you started a war with while simultaneously praising the country that you invaded unless you have ulterior motives. Trump could just be trying to butter up Iran to get them to give him a pass when Israel inevitably violates the MOU by bombing southern Lebanon, or he could be sending a message to Americans to get them to treat Israel like the scapegoat in the likely event shit hits the fan again. It is beneficial for Trump if American citizens and Iran at least mentally disaggregate the U.S. from Israel, even though their actions have been one and the same, because that really is the only way that America and Israel can extract political wins out of this situation, given their diverging interests. And it wouldn't be the first time that U.S. leadership has lied to us about their supposed anger with Israeli leadership. We saw this with the Biden administration too, where stories would conspicuously leak about how concerned Biden was about Israel's war crimes in Gaza, but that was obviously nothing more than damage control and an attempt to placate the Democratic Party's base who was opposed to his administration's complicity. So if Biden really was as concerned as he said he was, then he would have done the logical thing and cut off the money and the weapons to Israel. He never did that, though, because he supported what Israel was doing, and his feigned concern was nothing more than a failed attempt to placate the base ahead of the 2024 election. And here we are now, getting the same kind of leaks from the Trump regime about how mad he supposedly is at Netanyahu, coincidentally, right before another major election. Feeling deja vu, anybody? Because I sure am. And as angry as Trump supposedly is, he's expressed zero intent whatsoever to actually hold Netanyahu accountable by cutting him off financially and militarily. He threatens to cut off blue states that don't comply with his federal policies or ICE all the time. But we're supposed to believe that the thought of cutting off Israel never even crossed his mind, despite how fed up he apparently is with Netanyahu? I mean, it seems pretty hard to believe. For example, on June 1st, Axios published a report about Donald Trump supposedly going off on Netanyahu on a phone call over his escalation in Lebanon, telling Netanyahu, "You're fucking crazy. You'd be in prison if it weren't for me. I'm saving your ass. Everybody hates you now. Everybody hates Israel because of this." Another U.S. official said Trump was concerned by the fact that Israel had killed so many civilians in Lebanon, sound familiar, and objected to Israelis knocking down buildings to take out a single Hezbollah commander. A week later, Trump told the Financial Times that Israel would have no choice but to accept a deal he makes with Iran because he calls the shots, not them. But a week after that, Trump told Axios he was shocked when his advisors called to brief him about the Israeli strike in Beirut, and he fumed at Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Quote, "It is so bad, I couldn't believe it. An hour before we were supposed to sign the deal. Why did Bibi have to do a fucking attack? I was so pissed off. I let him know. He has no fucking judgment. I let him know that," Trump said. So who's really calling the shots? Because optically speaking, it looks like Netanyahu is the one who's calling the shots, not Donald Trump. But I mean, if my suspicion is right and all of this is nothing more than political theater, it's still hard for me to believe that one, Trump would be able to concoct a ruse this convincing, and two, that he would make himself look like this much of a cuck on purpose because he cares about his image over everything else. With that being said, if he really was mad at Israel, He would use his leverage as U.S. president to rein them in. If he implements a weapons embargo, they will not have the ability to wage a war in Lebanon. They rely on the U.S. to do everything that they're doing. The threat alone to do that might be enough, but he's refused to use his leverage. So, I mean, he's either a pushover or he's pretending to be a pushover, but neither of those explanations is super convincing to me, which suggests that there's maybe some alternate explanation that I haven't considered yet. Maybe Trump has no choice but to cave to Israel despite his public scoldings of them because they have some sort of blackmail on him or because he has financial interests in Israel that would be jeopardized if he pissed them off. I mean, Trump was best friends with Jeffrey Epstein, who was reportedly an Israeli intelligence asset. So does Israel have incriminating evidence on Donald Trump that they've obtained through Epstein? It sounds really conspiratorial, and I don't like to dabble in conspiracy theories, but as Dropsite News reports, there is ample evidence that Netanyahu actually blackmailed Bill Clinton with recordings of phone sex they had of him and Monica Lewinsky. Now, to be clear, that's never been confirmed beyond a shadow of a doubt, but it's not unreasonable to think that this rogue, genocidal terrorist state would blackmail their own ally to get what they want. So perhaps there's something there regarding Trump and the Epstein files. I don't know. But the explanation doesn't necessarily have to be that complicated because they didn't have blackmail on Biden. He's not in the Epstein files, and he still wouldn't cut them off as well. So, I mean, maybe it really is as simple as Netanyahu is just really good at getting what he wants from American politicians. And with regard to Trump, he took a lot of money from Israeli donors like Miriam Adelson, and the Trump crime family stands to personally profit from Israel's annexation of Gaza and even southern Lebanon. They could build luxury apartment complexes and build resorts on the graves of Palestinians in Gaza, and the Trump crime family can't really profit off of Israeli imperialism in the Middle East after he's president if he pisses them off while he's president. So that could also explain his behavior and, his willingness to pretend to be mad at Netanyahu. Netanyahu, I think, would understand if Trump publicly threw him under a bus for political reasons. Israel does the same thing to its allies to save face in their own country. But again, I have no fucking idea, honestly. Like, this is more conjecture on my part, and I don't know why Trump is acting the way he's acting. But the reason why I feel so inclined to question Trump's motives here is because none of this really makes sense. But it's also possible that it really is exactly as it seems. Our dipshit president is just getting increasingly frustrated with an ally who's taking advantage of his limited cognition. It could be as simple as that. It was Netanyahu, after all, who convinced Donald Trump to go to war with Iran in the first place when every other president, including Biden, refused. Occam's razor, right? But if Israel really is stringing Trump along, it means that they are no longer an ally or compliant vassal state. It means they've morphed into a hostile entity working directly against U.S. interests, which would warrant far more than a mere weapons embargo. I think sanctions would be justified at that point, although I don't think it would ever come to that because, love him or hate him, Israel is an extension of the U.S. empire in the Middle East. But Trump's motives aside, I don't know how peace in the Middle East is possible without regime change in Israel. And by regime change, to be clear, I don't mean them electing a new leader who's going to do the same fucking thing. I mean the systemic dismantling of the Israeli state in its current form with an entirely new constitution guaranteeing equal rights for everyone, including Palestinians, with the right to return. I don't think that a genocidal apartheid state is going to be conducive to long-term peace and stability in the Middle East. Quite the contrary, especially because they're trying to gobble up all of their neighbors for their Greater Israel project. But I think that's a different story for a different day. It's obvious why I feel so skeptical of Trump's motives, because none of us can trust anything this man has to say, ever. No American politician has ever lied as much as Donald Trump, so I'm not sure if the MOU is going to actually lead to temporary peace. But I do know that I trust Iran's word a whole hell of a lot more than Donald Trump's, and nobody would even think that's unreasonable at this point given his history of deceit. Because after saying a deal is around the corner 2-3 times, you begin to doubt whether or not he's actually serious about getting a deal. But after saying a deal is nearly complete 38 times, you begin to just tune them out and stop taking anything he says seriously and just expect this to be more market manipulation. But one thing I can say with certainty is that this war should have never happened in the first place. And Iran proved that they're able to hold their own against the mightiest military on earth, which is a big fat L for Donald Trump, however hard he's going to try to spin it. So if Trump does agree to terms that look like he has surrendered, my fear is that Republicans, as well as the media, might goad him back into the war in hopes that he'll somehow be able to gain the upper hand by bombing them more and have more leverage for better terms. I don't know. But it's extraordinarily difficult to discern fact from fiction during a war when you have a president living in an alternate universe in his head. But we'll know when the war is actually over, when the bombs stop dropping. Until then, anything he says is just noise at this point.
Alpha male, not a beta male.